Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Bible study. We're continuing in the Harmony of the Gospel series. We'll be in Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. And this passage sort of marks a turning point in the ministry of Jesus. With the execution of John the baptizer, Jesus must have been reminded of the coming cross, his cross. His popularity in his home area was waning because he was not the sort of leader and savior they were expecting. They were expecting a Messiah, the Christ, who would deliver them from the control of the Roman Empire. The religious leaders grew increasingly hostile towards him as well and his teachings during this period. Plus, he spent more of his ministry time in the areas that were outside of Jewish area, if you would, the Gentile areas, Perea, for instance. He proved that he did not only come to his own people, the Jews, but also the rest of the world. He was determined that the non-Jews should hear his message of good news, his message of salvation. He's found during this period of time taking the fight to his enemies, so to speak, as well. He confronted the Pharisees and other religious leaders in Judea and then even in Jerusalem. He even raised Lazarus from the dead in the village of Bethany, which was only a few miles from Jerusalem. So an active part of Jesus' ministry for sure. He was a spiritual Messiah, Christ, and not a socio-political leader, no military leader, but he was revealed as someone that had the courage to face his foes and make decisive actions, and certainly he did. He was intensive there and intentional with what everything he said and everything that he did, leading up, of course, to the cross and the tomb and the resurrection and ascension. But before that, let's get into Mark chapter 6, starting verse 30. It says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Now, remember, he had sent them out to perform miracles uh, two by two and do various miracles and preach and teach. So they returned from that. So it says in verse 31, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. And are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? So we're going to stop there. The Gospel of Mark uses the term apostles here. He does it one prior time as well, but it means one sent or one who is sent. These men were messengers who were authorized, specially authorized agents or missionaries for Jesus Christ. Uh, the word would become an official title for Jesus' 12 disciples after his resurrection, after Judas Iscariot was, of course, replaced. But Jesus and his disciples probably set out from Capernaum, sailed to hopefully a more sparsely populated area on the opposite side of the Lake of Galilee, and they were trying to get away from these great crowds and maybe get some peace and rest and have time Jesus would have time to teach them by themselves. Uh, and time to recharge, don't forget that. But the crowds followed Jesus anyway and actually apparently beat them there. Uh, you know, doing God's work is important, but Even Jesus recognized that to do it effectively, we need periodic rest and time alone and renewal. We all need it. Jesus' disciples didn't always get the rest they needed, as in this situation, and sometimes, we don't either. But we need to try to keep a right balance there. But back to this crowd. This crowd is likened to a flock of sheep without a shepherd. Without sheep are dumb. I think I've said that before, but without a shepherd, sheep are easily scattered, easily picked off by predators. They're in danger, real danger. Jesus was, of course, the good shepherd, and still is for those who follow him. He could teach them exactly what they needed to know and keep them from straying from God, and he still does that through his word. And what they needed to know, withstand the enemy's attacks. And again, he still does that today through his word. But the Passover, this is centered around the Passover. It says the Passover was near. This helps explain the gathering of so many people, this large crowd in such an isolated area. During the Passover, the Jews would come from all over the known world to celebrate this Passover festival. They would gladly go out of their way a bit to see this man that they've probably heard a lot about, and some have already seen what he could do. And he was called a great prophet who performed so many miracles and taught with great authority. So here we have another large crowd that's following Jesus around. In Luke's account, the disciples were the first to approach Jesus about the crowds and the issue that it raised. Perhaps they were all hungry. By this time, their own discomfort made them think of the crowd's problem, just having enough food to eat. Jesus tested Philip to see how he would respond to this problem. Uh, and when asked about how to get the food for the people, Philip wondered where someone would get enough money to even buy enough bread for such a crowd. The disciples were still pondering on who Jesus was at this point, no doubt. They did not fully comprehend who he was anyway. I mean, they wouldn't till after the resurrection, but they were so preoccupied with the immensity of the task before them that they they could not see that what was impossible in their minds was possible with God. And Jesus has already proved that time and again. With man, we're limited, but with God, all things are possible. Uh, and good question. Do you let what seems impossible about Christianity keep you from believing? Or as a Christian, do you let seemingly impossible tasks, projects, ministries keep you from even trying? Don't. Because again, what seems impossible to us, God just might make possible. So let's go on. Mark chapter 6, we're going to look at verses 28 through 43. And then in the middle here, we're going to look at John chapter 6, verses 8 through 10 as well. So, verse 38 in Mark 6 says, "How many loaves do you have?" He asked, Jesus asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, "Five and two fish." And then John chapter 6 tells us another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. And then back to Mark 6, it says, "Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. Then the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Excuse me. Andrew had inquired among the crowd, apparently, and came up with 5 small barley loaves and 2 sardine-sized fish. More than likely, they were the sardine-sized fish. That was the average fare. Near the Sea of Galilee, this was typical fare for the poorer in their society. Andrew just knew that this was really inadequate, and we would think the same thing. What kind of dent would that make with thousands of people, some 5,000 people here? Well, Jesus had the people sit down in small groups, larger groups, but he saved the apostles really the time of a lot of the labor of distributing all this food uh, to each person this way. This way, each person could be fed, and that the reality of this great miracle could be witnessed by his apostles. It would be easier to count the crowd and get a better understanding just how great a miracle it really was for these disciples. The crowds, they might not have understood just what was happening here. We're not told about them, but there were about 5,000 men, it says. Because of the distance from Capernaum, uh, some think that maybe the women and children stayed back in the city instead of following. Maybe it was just mostly men that did this. Well, we don't know. That's just speculation. But we do know that they were not usually, the women and children usually weren't counted because Jewish custom did not permit really the women and children to sit down with the men and share a meal. But after giving thanks, Jesus began distributing the food to his disciples, who would in turn distribute it to the groups of people. Miraculously, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish never ran out. Not only did everyone eat, but it says they were filled, according to the Gospel of Mark. This showed Jesus' sufficiency, even in times of doubt, even in times of want, for that matter. So uh, through this miracle, uh, the food that remained afterwards was counted. I mean, the disciples went on to collect the leftovers so nothing would be wasted, and so that they could learn just how sufficient Jesus was, overly sufficient, might I add. Jesus set a great example of stewardship here. Waste not, want not as well. But we learn from the Gospel of John that following this miracle, the people were about to take Jesus by force and make him king. Uh, Food was a way of making people agreeable, bringing them together. So it's not surprising that some in the crowd decided Jesus uh, was more than likely the promised Messiah, and they were going to make him be the king, and really make him be the kind of Messiah they were expecting. And I'm guessing that some didn't care whether he was the Messiah or not. This was the kind of person they would take as their king that could provide food for them continually, but this was not Jesus' intentions. He wouldn't let this happen. So he slipped away to finally get some peace, apparently, to sort of a mountain retreat, if you will. And when asked, the disciples here were astonished if they could go and spend 8 months' wages of bread, or of 8 months of wages on bread just to feed these people, and that probably wouldn't even been enough. So, my question, and Jesus provided, obviously. So, my question: how do we react when we're given a seemingly impossible task, especially when it comes to the ministry in the name of Jesus Christ? I mean, a situation that seems impossible with our human resources and sometimes our knowledge is simply an opportunity for God to step in and teach us something. Just as Jesus taught his disciples something about his power here, his miraculous power. Uh, I mean, in those times, we probably learn the most when our faith is stretched, when God shows who He really is in our life. The disciples, of course, they did everything they could by gathering the available resources and organizing the people, as Jesus said. And then he stepped in. God stepped in and did what seemed impossible. So, when facing the impossible, even in ministry or whatever the case, uh, do what you can and ask God to do the rest. He may see fit in His will to make the impossible possible. He has a habit of doing that. And I know He has in my life. Maybe you can say the same thing. I pray that this lesson has been a blessing to you. May God bless you and keep you, give you peace till we can meet again and study His Word. Oh, and there will not be a message posted today. We have a special speaker, so we will hopefully find a way to record that and post it later on. God bless you.